Imagine a machine that doesn't just move you from one place to another, but transports you through eras, across cultures, and into a lifestyle that feels at once rebellious and timeless. Picture a sound that cuts through the noise of traffic with a sharp, distinctive note, and a design that remains instantly recognizable decades later. This isn't just transportation. It's a statement, a rolling piece of heritage that turned ordinary commutes into something more personal, more alive, and more enduring. For some, it was a first taste of independence. For others, it became a lifelong companion. From bustling European avenues to crowded Asian city streets, it carried groceries, love letters, and entire subcultures on its steel frame. The question is, how does something so seemingly modest grow into a global phenomenon, cherished and defended long after newer, faster, and flashier machines arrived? That's the story we're uncovering today. The rise of a two-stroke legend that defined a generation and still turns heads with its unmistakable style. If you enjoy deep dives into the vehicles that shaped culture, make sure to like, subscribe, and drop a comment with which icon you want to see next. The Vespa PX200 arrived in 1977 as a continuation of a lineage that had already established itself as a cultural and practical force. But this model carried a special weight. It was meant to balance tradition with the growing demands of modern mobility. When the PX200 was introduced, it wasn't positioned as a flashy innovation. Instead, it was an evolution of proven engineering, a refinement of the Vespa formula that had captured attention worldwide since the post-war years. To understand why the PX200 matters, you have to picture the late 1970s. European cities were congested, fuel costs were unpredictable, and urban transport needed to be cheap, reliable, and easy to service. The PX200 offered exactly that, but with enough displacement and torque to handle longer trips and heavier riders, giving it an edge over the smaller displacement scooters that dominated the streets. Its design was instantly recognizable: rounded steel bodywork that hid the frame, a single-sided front fork that simplified wheel changes, and of course the left-hand manual shifter that turned riding into an almost ritual experience. What seemed like quirks at the time would become badges of authenticity. For buyers, this wasn't just another scooter. It was a machine with character, one that demanded a learning curve and rewarded those who mastered it. Owners quickly realized that this scooter could carry them not just through their city, but into entirely new lifestyles. It became the tool for commuters, students, small businesses, and travelers alike. Unlike more fragile or purely commuter-focused rivals, the PX200 could be patched up on the roadside with a handful of tools, its two-stroke engine forgiving and simple enough for home mechanics to maintain. In some parts of the world, it became the backbone of small-scale economies, a workhorse that could carry more than it was ever designed to. In others, it was an aspirational machine, more expensive than the smaller Vespas, but considered worth the stretch because of its capability. Yet beneath all that practicality was something more subtle. The PX200 retained the intangible charm that had always separated Vespa scooters from utilitarian two-wheelers. Riding one felt different, looked different, and signaled to others that the rider had made a deliberate choice. Style and identity mattered as much as efficiency. This dual role, practical and cultural, was no accident. Piaggio's design and marketing leaned into both, ensuring that the PX200 wasn't just transportation, but an accessory to modern life. As the model spread globally, it adapted to each new market, from Italy's tight cobblestone streets to the open highways of Australia and the dense traffic of Southeast Asia. In each place, it solved the same problems: cheap, flexible mobility. But it also created new stories, memories and identities tied to its silhouette. To understand how the PX200 became a global icon, though, we need to examine not only its engineering and design, but also the way it clashed and cooperated with market trends, competitors, and subcultures. That's where the story deepens, because what began as a practical evolution soon grew into a cultural force with a reach far beyond Piaggio's expectations. The Vespa PX200 entered a competitive landscape where scooters were either shrinking in displacement to meet stricter fuel and emission standards, or disappearing altogether under the pressure of cheap, low-maintenance alternatives from other manufacturers, yet it carved out its own path. At a time when automatic scooters were beginning to gain traction, especially in urban areas where convenience was king, the PX200 doubled down on its manual gearbox and two-stroke simplicity, a decision that seemed stubborn to some but loyal to others. In Europe, it became the ride of choice for enthusiasts who valued tradition, while in Asia, it became the everyday solution for families and businesses who needed durability above all else. For many US riders, the PX200 represented an import oddity, but those who discovered it found a mix of charm and capability that set it apart from the small displacement scooters more commonly seen. The aftermarket scene amplified its reputation. Tuning shops learned to squeeze extra performance out of the 198cc engine, transforming it from a humble commuter into a surprisingly spirited machine. Clubs and cultural movements also latched onto it. The mod revival in Britain, collectors in Germany, and even delivery fleets in Southeast Asia, all putting the PX200 to work in ways Piaggio likely never imagined. Regulation presented hurdles, as emissions standards and safety laws tightened across the 1980s and 1990s, threatening the very core of the PX200's two-stroke heart. Each update forced compromises, from catalytic converters to detuned engines, but the essence of the scooter remained intact enough to satisfy purists and loyalists. Rivals attempted to win over the same audience with sleeker or more efficient machines, yet none captured the emotional attachment that seemed to come bundled with every PX200. What's striking is that this scooter's appeal spanned classes and continents. It wasn't tied to wealth or status, but to a feeling, a sense of belonging to something bigger than just a ride. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, when many thought two-strokes would fade into history, the PX200 held on. Kept alive by enthusiasts who prized its mix of simplicity, robustness, and unmistakable character. It was never the fastest or the flashiest, but it managed to be the scooter people looked back at after parking, the one that made errands feel like small adventures. To fully understand why the PX200 has endured when so many rivals have been forgotten, we have to look at its legacy, how it transitioned from mainstream transport to cult classic, and what that means for today's riders and collectors. The Vespa PX200, by the time it reached the new millennium, had shifted from being a common commuter vehicle to something closer to a cultural artifact, yet it never lost its ability to function in the real world. For enthusiasts, this model was more than a scooter. It was a bridge connecting decades of design philosophy and lifestyle. Proof that a machine rooted in the late 1970s could still feel relevant decades later. Its legacy lies not just in its steel bodywork or the familiar rasp of its two-stroke engine, but in how it symbolized resistance against the tide of disposable consumer products. Owners who kept their PX200s alive were keeping alive an ethos of repair, continuity, and authenticity that resonated with riders far beyond Italy. For collectors and clubs, the PX200 became the anchor of events and gatherings, a rolling reminder of how something modest could become iconic by simply refusing to fade away. In countries where emissions regulations eventually pushed it off the roads, it didn't vanish. It transitioned into vintage status, gaining new value as a preserved classic. For younger riders, discovering a PX200 today is a discovery of both heritage and practicality. It remains usable, rebuildable, and endlessly personalizable. For seasoned enthusiasts, it's a reminder of a time when riding wasn't just about efficiency, but about connection. Connection to a community, to style, and to an enduring mechanical rhythm. The story of the PX200 isn't about technological dominance or global market share. It's about longevity through character. That character has kept it alive in garages, on roads, and in the imaginations of those who still hear the echo of its exhaust note long after it passes. And that's why the PX200 endures, not just as a scooter, but as a symbol of what happens when design, culture, and sheer stubborn relevance collide. The Vespa PX200 left its mark not by being the most advanced or the most convenient scooter of its time, but by being the one that built a bond with its riders, a bond strong enough to carry it across decades and borders. For US audiences, the story of the PX200 might feel distant at first glance, since it was never sold here in large numbers, yet that rarity only adds to its mystique today. Enthusiasts seeking one in the American market often turn to import channels or specialized dealers, and while prices vary depending on originality and condition, the PX200 has reached a status where clean examples are considered collectible assets rather than disposable transport. Parts availability remains surprisingly healthy, thanks to a global aftermarket that has kept these machines alive. And mechanically, they remain approachable for anyone willing to learn the basics of two-stroke maintenance. Reliability is a matter of care. The engine is robust and forgiving, but it rewards routine attention, making ownership more of a partnership than a hands-off experience. For some riders, that hands-on nature is part of the charm. For others, It's a hurdle that separates casual users from true devotees. Either way, the PX200 represents a chapter of scooter history that refuses to close. It reminds us that a machine doesn't need cutting-edge performance or luxury to earn a lasting place in the cultural imagination. It just needs to be authentic, dependable, and capable of carrying stories as well as people. The fact that this scooter remains desirable long after production ended speaks volumes about its impact. In a world where vehicles often fade into anonymity once discontinued, the PX200 continues to inspire clubs, events, and a sense of connection across generations. For US viewers curious about diving into classic scooter ownership, it stands as a gateway, one that offers not only a ride but a community and a piece of living history. And that's the legacy of the Vespa PX200. Not just a machine of the past, but a timeless companion for anyone seeking character, connection, and an enduring sense of freedom.